Okay, well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the University of Canterbury's 2013 What If Wednesdays lecture series. The lectures are free, but with each one, we do ask that you register online. If you've not already done so, you can register online to be sent regular emails about the upcoming lectures, although I think we're coming towards the end of this lot of them. We hope that you enjoyed this evening's lectures and indeed that you'll return to attend other ones. So if you would like to know more about the lectures, not just tonight's, then please do register online to be told about them. My name is Jeremy Clark, and I'm the head of the Department of Economics and Finance here at the University of Canterbury. And before I proceed further, I have been asked to announce some emergency procedures in case we need to evacuate the room during the lecture, God forbid. So in the event of an emergency, the designated safe assembly point for this building, once you exit it, is called the Clyde Car Park. And in case you're wondering where that is, this is just to the east of this building, down Arts Road near Clyde Road. Now tonight it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Seamus Hogan, who will be speaking to us about a sport he loves, cricket. And in particular, he's going to be speaking on what if economics could help cricket teams win matches. Seamus will talk for about an hour, and following this there'll be time for questions. And before Seamus takes the floor, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about him. So unlike many of the other members of our department, Seamus was born and bred right here in Christchurch, and he received all his degrees from the University of Canterbury. But he did eventually venture out to see the wider world, and he partly just to learn why indeed New Zealand is such a special place. After leaving New Zealand in 1986, Seamus had academic positions at the State University of New York at Buffalo, or SUNY Buffalo, and McGill University in Montreal, followed by a stint as a government economist, first at the Bank of Canada and then at Health Canada. And much to our benefit and to the benefit of the students in my department, Seamus then returned to Christchurch. He came back to us in 2001 to take up his current position at the University of Canterbury. Seamus's research has been on varied topics, pretty interesting ones. He's published in microeconomic theory, labor economics, monetary policy, health economics, and some pretty hairy mathematical economics. He coordinates the annual New Zealand Economics Association conference, and together with colleague Eric Crampton, he blogs at Offsetting Behavior, economics policy blog. More recently, Seamus's research has been more New Zealand specific, looking at online auctions on TradeMe, or the New Zealand electricity market and the regulation of it. And of course, the topic of tonight's lecture, which is cricket. And one accomplishment of Seamus's that I should definitely point out to this crowd is that with his former PhD student Scott Brooker, Seamus created the WASP, or the Winning and Score Predictor system used this summer in Sky Sports coverage of limited overs cricket. So finally, as you might tell by my mispronunciation of that last expression, I'm going to make a brief and shameful confession. Though having lived in New Zealand myself for most of the last 14 years, I still know so little about cricket, and I'll spare you my colleagues' humor on this point. But tonight, while I hope you cricket enthusiasts learn some interesting economics, I'm hoping to learn a little bit more about this great national game. So take it away, Seamus.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. And so, obviously tonight's talk is about economics and cricket. I have been a cricket tragic for close on 40 years, ever since I was at primary school. So for the best part of 40 years, I've been a cricket tragic. Now that's quite a common affliction, and it's certainly an admirable affliction. But for almost as long, I've had another affliction which is not as common, probably not as admirable, and that is that I'm an economics tragic. And so it was a huge thrill a few years ago to get the opportunity to supervise my student Scott Brooker on a project where I was able to bring the two of them together. And so at this point, I should do some acknowledgements. All the work that I've been doing on cricket, which has been ongoing and is still going on, has been joint with students that I've supervised. And so I'd like to acknowledge them. Scott Brooker, who's here tonight, and all the stuff that I'm talking about tonight is actually coming from the work that Scott did as part of his PhD thesis. Johnny Sharland, who is now at the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, and Marcus Downs, who's also here tonight, who's current honours student continuing to do cricket work. But I'd also like to acknowledge New Zealand Cricket. It was New Zealand Cricket that came up with the idea originally for this project and tried to pitch it to the stats department. And I think you went through the computing department before you finally reduced yourself to economics. Is that right, Pete? Yeah. But they have been very, very supportive. Funding of data, funding of scholarships for Scott. And at no point, and we've been sort of working with New Zealand Cricket now since 1986, at no point has anybody there ever said to our face anyway, oh, come on, you're economists, what the hell do you know about this game? And so I'm very grateful that they have constantly supported. We've been through about 3 chief executives, 5 head coaches, and numerous reorganisations at New Zealand Cricket. And the relationship is ongoing despite that, and it has been just constant support the whole time. And I really did think that at some point someone's going to say, what the hell has this got to do with economics? And I'm going to guess that a few of you have also asked the same question, what the hell has economics got to do with cricket? And there's really 2 parts to that question. So here's a different title that we could do with what if. What if a boffin sitting in front of a computer can contribute to sports analysis? Now, I've put this one in because this is a university lecture and we like to show that we do proper scholarship and cite our sources. I'm here quoting Brendan Telfer from Radio Sport. This arose earlier this year when he was talking with Mark Richardson at the end of Mark Richardson's breakfast show about our WASP, and he was pretty much saying that, what's this nonsense, probably created by some boffin sitting in front of a computer somewhere. Well, actually, it was 2 boffins. And at least, I mean, Sky Sport actually did the same sort of thing. When the first game in the England series, when they used the WASP, somebody tweeted, what the hell is this? And Sky Sport tweeted back, it was created by 2 boffins, quote, at the University of Dunedin. I felt like tweeting back, no, University of Christchurch, but anyway. But so, that's the question, but it's actually very similar to the question that my father asked me when I first got involved in this, which is, are you going to teach the black caps how to move their feet? But it's not unheard of for sports to involve statistical analysis and a lot of data to try to improve their performance. So the more interesting part of the question, what has it got to do with economics, is why economics in particular? There's quite a big literature on the economics of sport. We have our own journals and so on. But it's mostly looking at aspects of sport as a business. What does it take to make money, and what do players sell for, and this kind of thing. We want to look at on-field strategy. How can we actually make teams perform better? Now, if you think, well, what's the relationship between economics and what goes on in the field, you're probably thinking of something like this. But no, it's not. Because the mistake would be to think that economics is about money. And in fact, money is the thing that economics is least about. What we're about in economics is trying to see beyond the veil of money to see what the real resources and the interactions that go on behind that. So if you'll bear with me, I want to depart from talking about cricket for a few minutes, not too long, I hope, and just give you a really basic lesson in economics. Economics in 4 easy lessons. And this is sort of basically a talk that I have given to high school students or whatever, people who are sort of coming into economics. And it's based on 4 quotes, most of them from former students of mine. First thing you need to know about economics is the world is one great big downward sloping curve, which is what a student at Buffalo once said to me. You know, I was just pointing out how we seem to keep coming back to the same looking diagrams, even though the situation was quite different. And I was talking about how it's underlying scarcity that creates everything that's interesting. If resources are scarce, if you want more of one thing, you have to have less of another. Oh, so you're saying the world is just one great big downward sloping curve. And I thought I liked that, so I've been using it ever since, without attribution. Second thing is, You know, the NRA in the America has this famous quote, "Guns don't kill people, people kill people." Absolutely ridiculous in my view, but I don't want to talk about gun control. But I've appropriated that for economics. Economies don't make decisions. It's the individuals in the economy that make decisions. That's going to be something I want to come back to right at the end. But the basic idea is that we're talking about choice. We need to, when we think about economic interaction, what are the choices made by individuals? Thirdly, famous quote, people respond to incentives. And finally, another quote from a student of mine, which is, the price system is a miracle. That's actually a slightly sanitized version of what the quote was originally. Okay, now let me just talk about that. Well, the downward sloping line, or the downward sloping curve. One of the things we love in economics is the production possibility frontier. Very simple idea. We show all the different combinations of outputs that could be achieved when scarce resources are used without waste. And so it might look something like this. Don't worry, I will get back to cricket. So a farmer, he could produce corn, he could produce wheat, he's got a fixed amount of farmland. If he's going to produce lots of corn, he has to use lots of the land for that, and he won't get much wheat, but he could do it the other way around. Okay, so just conveying the notion that there is a trade-off. You have to choose from one thing or another. I can put choice onto the same diagram. What I've got here, we've got jargon terms. We call this an iso-profit line. But basically the idea is it's points where you're going to be making the same amount of profit as a farmer. You can make profit by selling a lot of corn and not much wheat. If you're going to sell less corn, you're going to have to sell more wheat to get the same amount of profit. And so there's those combinations do the same. If I move up a line, I'm selling more wheat for the same amount of corn. I'm going to be making more money, so that represents a better outcome. And that represents an even better one again. But that one there is not feasible. This is the best that we could. So this is a standard kind of diagram we use for illustrating choice. Okay, simple first or second year economics diagram. And there's an optimal point that I've got there in black. Not centered as nicely as I'd like, but my PowerPoint just won't allow me to nudge these little dots, I'm afraid. Okay, now what about incentives? Well, people respond to incentives is something that tends to be taken as so obvious it's hardly worth stating by economists. And oftentimes, if you read the comment sections on news items and blogs and things, regarded as an absolutely ridiculous assumption about the world by non-economists. But all we mean by that is not that people are super calculating automatons who every time they go into a supermarket take out their little calculators and start working out costs and benefits before they choose to buy anything. It's just a very simple statement that if either what is possible for a person or what benefit they would get from their choices were to change, they're likely to change their choice. So back to our example, if we had a high price of corn, then if I'm going to give up some corn, I need a lot of wheat to get the same profit. I get a very steep curve. And I'm going to choose, obviously, an area with a lot of corn, not much wheat. Medium price of corn, well, I'm going to move around a little bit. And if there's a low price of corn, well, I end up with a very flat curve. I don't need much more wheat to make up for the loss of this very low price of corn. And so I end up doing something with a lot of wheat, not much corn. So again, nothing particularly outstanding here. Price of dairy has gone through the roof compared to the price of wool in New Zealand. Lots of sheep farms have been converted into dairy. Just movement along a frontier. Why is this interesting? We will get there. The miracle of prices. Okay, now when my student told me that the price system is a ... miracle, it was referring to this normal idea here, that the price system is a wonderful way of coordinating things in the economy. And this is something we teach in our courses all the time. The idea that prices are a wonderful way of communicating information and making things feasible that otherwise wouldn't be feasible in the way of coordination. But there's something else about prices that we're actually not used to talking that much in economics, but perhaps we should talk about more, is it's the price system that makes empirical work in economics possible. It's because prices contain so much information that we can extract that information ourselves when we're looking at data and thinking about what's going on. So let me give you an example. Okay, I had here what would happen to this farmer if he had a high price of corn, but what say we don't know what his production possibility is. He knows his farm, he knows his ability, we don't know that, and we can't see it. But one thing that's very easy for us to see is what's the price of corn, what's the price of wheat, and what did he do? And then if the price of corn changed, we'd be able to see some more things. And if the price of corn changed again, we'd see some more. And we might be able to start to make a pretty good guess about what the production frontier was that lay underneath it. Obviously, it's a guess, it's not for sure. But we can actually get a lot of information just from watching what people do and what the prices that motivated them. OK, so that's the last time I will not talk about cricket. What's it got to do with cricket? Well, first of all, in cricket, in ODI cricket in particular, or limited overs cricket, we're dealing with the fundamental thing of economics, which is scarcity. We have two scarce resources. You go to bat, you've got 50 overs, 300 legitimate balls. After that, you're turfed off the field. You have to look after that scarce resource and allocate it well. You have another scarce resource. You've only got 11 batsmen, and you have to have 2 of them at once. Once 10 of them are out, again, you're turfed off the field. And both those reservoirs decline. You never get balls back, you never get wickets back. And so as the game progresses, you're losing your resource of runs, your balls, you're losing your resource of wickets. Depending on which one is falling more quickly than the other, that changes how you have to husband those resources. A batsman has a production possibility frontier. A batsman can choose to play very conservatively, not loft the ball, not have a high backlift, not step away to the leg side, and minimise the chances that they're going to go out. But if they do that, they're probably not going to score very fast. They also have the option of doing all those things: big backlifts, lofting balls, stepping away to the leg side, playing garbage shots like reverse sweeps and ramps, all the rest of that stuff. OK, so I'm a Test cricket traditionalist, I'll confess, even though almost all the work has been on limited overs. And so there you have a trade-off. And it'd be very nice to know, are our players and our favourite team sensibly making the best of the resources they have in terms of their own ability? But the trouble is, we have no idea what their production frontier is. Add to the complication, which I didn't have in my graph of corn and wheat, is it is random. Just because somebody went out on one occasion doesn't mean that they're a very bad batsman. Things happen. You sometimes get unplayable deliveries and so on. But it would be nice to know where their frontier is, because the location of the frontier is a measure of the batsman's skill, the skill of the opposition, partly the conditions in which the game is being played. But where he should go on the frontier is going to depend on choice and incentives, the guts of economics. But we can't do much if we don't know what the frontier is. So how can we infer what a batsman's PPF is? Well, we're going to use exactly the same techniques that I talked about before. Basic economics, what's called the weak axiom of profit maximization, but don't worry about its name. Just to let you know, it is actually a jargon term in economics. We're going to observe the choices and incentives that face the batsman, and then we're going to join the dots. Yeah, it's a little bit more statistically complicated than that, but it is roughly that idea of taking a bunch of points and connecting them with a pencil. OK, but first of all, we need to know what are the incentives facing people. So I'm going to talk about waspish incentives, because what we use to find the incentive is exactly the graph that is the WASP. Actually, it's more the SP part of WASP. WASP stands for winning and score predictor. The winning predictor is what's used in the second innings. The score predictor is what's used in the first innings. And this is basically what drives the score predictor. Is what you have down here is the number of overs that have been completed in the first innings, 0 to 50. And what the curve is showing is the expected, or the average number of runs that the average batting team against the average bowling team on the particular pitch that this graph is designed for, how many more runs they're likely to score. So 243, if the game's just about to start, is the average score on a 243 pitch. Obviously, if 25 overs have gone and you haven't lost any wickets yet, which is what V0 refers to, you're not going to score 243 runs from that point on because you've used up half your balls, but you are going to actually still be able to score a fair chunk. This graph, by the way, comes from our work. We've created this ourselves from the data, but graphs like this exist in lots of other work that's been done, including a famous paper by a couple of statisticians in an operations research journal. A couple of guys by the name of Duckworth and Lewis have produced a graph like this. It's a chance, it's a talk for another day, why this is a hell of a lot better than the Duckworth and Lewis one. For now, just take it for granted. This is the one we're using. Okay, now let's think about what this means. Is after every ball, you're going to move down your curve for sure, because you're going to have used up one unit of your scarce resource. If you had 250 balls left after the ball is played, you've only got 249. So the amount of runs you're likely to be able to score from that point on is going to be less. But if you go out, you're going to drop down to the line below, what the finance people would call making a capital loss. That if you're having to make a choice, gee, I've just hit the ball into the covers and Martin Guptill is swooping in, should I try for a run? And you say, well, if I don't, I'm just going to have used up a ball and got nothing for it. And if I do go for the run, there's a chance that I'm going to get run out. If I don't get run out, I've contributed one extra run. If I do go out, I've just contributed possibly minus 30 runs. Okay? But notice what happens. If you go out early in the piece, particularly if you lose your fourth wicket early in the piece, your potential score suffers hugely. If you go out near the end, it's not going to make that much difference to how many more runs. So if you're thinking, should I take a risky single when Martin Guptill is fielding? If you're somewhere down here and it's near the end of the innings, probably worth a go. First ball of the match, probably a very bad idea. Here's this idea of incentives. Well, it's what economists call prices. The price of a wicket is very high up here. The price of a wicket is very low down here. So you've seen this graph before, except I've now changed what's on the axes. Down here, I've got the probability of not going out. Up here, I've got the expected runs you're going to score on the next ball. And here we have our unobservable batsman's production frontier. And so I've got a situation here where I've drawn a very steep line, which is if there's a high cost of a wicket. If you're at the early stage of the innings and you're likely to lose 25 to 30 runs just by losing a wicket, then you need to have a very low probability of going out to justify trying to score one more run. If, on the other hand, you're in the middle stages, the slope of that curve is exactly just 1 divided by, it's the cost of a wicket. If I'm at this stage, I'm probably going to want to take a little bit more risk and try to score a bit more quickly. If I'm up here, very low cost of a wicket, I'm in what's called the death, then you should probably be trying to be very aggressive. In fact, we have taken the noun death and created the adjective deathness, or the degree of deathness, to talk about the slope of this curve. The greater is the deathness, the greater is the level of aggression that you should be doing. Okay, well, if I've got all of those, remember what we did before? We can't observe the production possibility frontier, but because we've got the WASP, we can observe what the cost of a wicket is in any circumstance. We can observe, on average, how many runs batsmen score when the cost of a wicket is, say, 23, and how often they go out when the cost of a wicket is 23. On average, how much do they score when the cost of a wicket is only 2, and so on. We've got all this data, and we can just start using the same techniques that we use in economics to infer real things by looking at prices and choices. But at this point, you're going to say, well, isn't this assuming rationality, right? If I'm going to use prices, or in this case, cost of a wicket, to infer something that's unobservable, like people's preferences or people's technologies and abilities, isn't that going to rest on the assumption that people respond predictably to incentives? And yes, it does. And at that point, you say, well, look, I've always had some suspicions about this assumption of rationality that you economists make when it comes to talking about businesses. But for goodness sake, when it comes to cricket players, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, after all, why are we all cricket fans? There wouldn't be any fun in being a sports spectator if you weren't able to look at the TV or look at the game and start screaming, "You blithering idiot, if only I was there, it'll be so much better," right? The whole notion of sports spectating is based on the idea is that sportsmen are actually stupid. And here we are assuming that they're rational, aren't we? Isn't that a real stretch when we talk about sportsmen? Well, I want you to let you in on economics' best kept secret. You can go out and tell everybody if you want. There is no assumption ever in economics that people are rational in the everyday sense of the word. The only assumption that we ever make is that people are internally consistent in some way. And therefore that people are going to respond in a potentially predictable way to changes in the incentives that they face, even if they're going to change from something really stupid to something equally stupid. It's that change that we talk about. We never, ever, ever in our theories assume that people are rational in the way that the word is used in everyday life. And so, quite apart from the fact that we don't need to assume that sportsmen are rational, we also, by admitting that they might not be, we're actually able to ask some interesting questions of, are they doing the right thing? Or maybe economists, rather than assuming they're doing the right thing as an assumption, could actually turn around and help them do the right thing. And this is where we want to go with this. So here's some empirical questions. Are players weakly optimal? I'm going to ask about, in some nice economics jargon, monotonicity and convexity, lovely terms that we use in all our second-year courses. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second. I'm going to ask if players are strongly optimal, by which we mean, do they choose the optimal point on their frontiers? And what is the relative contribution of ability and smarts to how well a batsman does? I'm concentrating on batsmen here, by the way, not bowlers. We could do all of this for bowlers, but when we're talking about strategic decision-making, we know that batsmen have more control over the pace of a game than bowlers do. And the reason we know that is that at the start of an innings, the cost of a wicket is high, and so what the batting team would like is to conserve wickets, and they don't worry too much about scoring fast. At the end of an innings, scoring fast is more important than conserving wickets. If you're a bowling team, taking wickets is more important at the start, conserving runs is more important at the end. So who succeeds? We know that the wicket taking rate goes up as the game goes on. The run scoring rate goes up as the game goes on, exactly what the batsmen want and the bowlers don't. So we know from that that the batsmen have more strategic control, and therefore that's why we focus on batsmen. Okay, so let's have a look at this. I want to define these terms. So monotonicity. Production functions should be downward sloping, not upward. So here's a hypothetical batsman. This is the curve I've been using all along. This is just purely made up numbers here. It doesn't mean anything. But what you should see is that it's downward sloping. If you're going to bat very conservatively, you won't score at a very fast rate. If you take more risks, you can score at a faster rate. I wouldn't expect to see that. That would be an example of non-monotonic production frontiers. Now, there's nothing wrong with the idea that a batsman, in being more aggressive, not only increases his chance of going out, but also reduces the amount of runs he scores, because if he's going out, he's not scoring runs. So there's nothing to saying that by doing the things that constitute greater aggression, bigger backlifts, lofted shots, stepping away to the leg side, etc., that this wouldn't be possible. It's just that if this is what was going to happen, no player should ever choose to do it. So you shouldn't actually see it in the data. Non-convexity. Production functions should bend towards the axes, not away from them. So again, here's my example of what a function or a frontier should look like, and that's what it shouldn't look like. Now, again, there's no reason at all, there's no cricket intuition for why it shouldn't look like that. But if this is what your frontier looked like, well, if you had a high cost of a wicket, you might want to go somewhere like that. If you had a low cost of a wicket somewhere up there, in between, you might be indifferent. You could go here or here and it'll give you the same. But never would you choose to go to there, because if you could go there, you'd be better off either here or here. So although there's nothing wrong in principle with a frontier being shaped like that, we should never observe it in the data. So if empirically, if a function turned up like this, we'd say something is going wrong with that batsman. There's something that he's doing which is not quite right. And strong optimality is just the idea that batsmen should choose the point on their frontiers where the slope of the frontier is equal to the cost of a wicket. Now again, if you've done economics, right, marginal rate of substitution equals marginal rate of substitution out something else, right? This is just absolutely, God, how many times do we have to see this? I come along to a cricket and we're still getting this bloody marginal something equals marginal something else. But, you know, it's a common kind of idea. So here we have it. Here's our nice proper function. It's got the right slope. It doesn't have strange bendy in bits. But the batsman chooses to go here when this is the cost of a wicket. And he could do better by being out there. Okay? So a strongly optimal batsman in the data, we would not only see a nice frontier that looked like that, we would see him choosing this point here. Okay, so what did we expect we'd see when we looked at the data? Well, we didn't think that we'd find that batsmen are strongly optimal. After all, Scott and I are both diehard sports fans, which means we like screaming at the TV and saying what a blundering idiot is out there. So, you know, we didn't really want to see that people were optimal. We're a bit agnostic on whether you'd expect to see the thing bending in. We weren't sure what was going to happen on that. But there's just no way in hell we were going to find upward sloping frontiers. Batsmen who choose to be at a point where they could both reduce their chance of going out and increase the amount of scoring they did. Okay, so let me give you some real examples here. Here's a couple of characters, and I should add, by the way, that this work dates from when Scott did his PhD, and so it was back pretty much in the period around the West Indian World Cup. The data comes from that era. 2003 to 2007, goes a little bit later, but it doesn't have the more recent games. This was a period when New Zealand was coached by John Bracewell, when New Zealand got itself up to number 3 in the world ODI rankings. Fleming was at the top of his game during this period, and so was Sachin Tendulkar. Now, you won't be surprised if I tell you that we have shown that Sachin Tendulkar is a better batsman with more ability than Stephen Fleming. You might be surprised if we tell you that Stephen Fleming is a smarter batsman than Sachin Tendulkar. We didn't have many examples like this, but here is our upward sloping production frontier. Now, the first thing you see is that this is Sachin Tendulkar, for goodness sake. He's a god. There's just no way. And I can tell you, we've done everything that we could possibly think of, and Scott's come up with all kinds of clever ways of asking the question in a different way, and there's nothing we can do about Sachin Tendulkar. This is specifically in the power play, by the way, so it doesn't apply all the time. There's nothing we could do to get rid of that upward sloping. That is pretty darn clear. That is Sachin Tendulkar's frontier. One of the things, by the way, you will find is the better the player, the more likely we are to find anomalies. Let me give you 2 more examples. Michael Clarke. Okay, now he was not necessarily at the peak of his powers during the period that we're looking at. He's really come of his own recently, learned more on Test cricket. Ricky Ponting absolutely was just in unbelievable form through the period of this data set. Both of them, wrong shape. I should add, we were agnostic on whether we'd see this. We saw very little of this, very little. Mostly very, very good players. But the vast majority of players had the right shape frontiers. So let me give you a couple of others. Scott Styris and Kumar Sangakkara. Now, to be fair to what I'm going to say about Kumar Sangakkara, this was before he became the #1 ranked Test batsman in the world, and this was at a time when he was being very harshly criticised back at home for his play in one-day cricket. But there's no doubt he is an immensely talented batsman, and he was back in this period. And you won't be surprised. Well, first of all, here's 2 proper-looking, downward-sloping, nicely convex, well-behaved production functions. These are 2 players who know what they're doing. And the vast majority of players are like this. It's just a few idiotic geniuses like Tendulkar, Ponting, and Clark, who have it the wrong way round. And so what we have here is weak optimality, monotonicity, convexity. But what about strong optimality? Are these players at the right point on their frontier? There's no question that in the particular game situation that we're illustrating here, maybe if the cost of a wicket was very, very high, there's an area where you'd prefer to have Styrus rather than Sangakkara, but that might just be a little bit of statistical inaccuracy at the ends of estimating these things, because I mean, we're using data. These things are all estimated with best guesses. But Sangakkara is the guy who's got the more talent. He should be contributing more to his team than Styrus is to his. Now, you're going to find this a little bit hard to read, but let me tell you what each of these lines is. The dark brown dotted line here represents the number of runs that Sangakkara would contribute to his team per ball if he were to behave optimally. And the dark blue line is how much Styrus would be able to contribute to his team if he behaved optimally. And that's a difference of about a 12th of a run per ball, which is not a lot, but a 12th of a run per ball with half a run and over. That's 25 runs over the course of an innings. And 25 runs is actually a big difference in an ODI cricket game. The yellow dotted line is what Sangakkara actually contributed by not being at an optimal point, but batting too conservatively. The light blue line is what Styrus contributed by being slightly more conservative than his optimal point. So what you've got here is Sangakkara, a much better player, but not as much strategic nous. My apologies, Akmal. That's okay. Sri Lanka were beating us at the time. This does cover the period of the semi-final in the World Cup, so you got the last laugh. But if you look at that difference between what Sangakkara could achieve given his raw ability if he just made the right strategic decisions, and what he actually achieved is a 1/6 of a run per ball, 1 run per over, 50 runs per match. If everybody in his team was sufficiently suboptimal, that is a difference of 50 runs. That is a massive, massive amount of suboptimality. Now, you won't be surprised to hear that I've cherry-picked the examples. This is the best example that we could come up with involving a New Zealand player that illustrates where clearly one player is better than the other, but the less able player actually contributes more than the better one just because of strategic nous. Okay, so here's a puzzle. Question that I ask, why does New Zealand punch above its weight in one-day international cricket relative to Test cricket? Recently, we haven't been doing so well, but we've started to move up the rankings. But certainly for a large part of our history, and certainly the period of the data where all the numbers I've shown you today come from, New Zealand would be ranked 3rd in the world in one-day international cricket and 7th or 8th in Test cricket. Why do we punch above our weight? Well, it could be because our bowlers are suited to dibbly-dob line length. They can't actually take 20 wickets to win a Test match. It could be because our batsmen are hand-eye coordination, lead-footed, swing and miss flat-track bullies who are good at playing at Napier, but the moment that the ball starts simming around, they're completely at sea. But maybe what I just showed you with Styrus and Sangakkara is representative. And in fact, when we have looked at all the New Zealand players from that era, the thing which struck us over and over and over again was how consistently New Zealand players, New Zealand batsmen, were much, much closer to their optimum in choosing the right amount of aggression than were comparable players from the other better countries. Okay, here's another puzzle. Why has the batting power play contributed so little to batting teams' first innings scores? Now, so here's the story. If you have a look at the Wasp and say, what would the Wasp predict if the batting power play had already finished, would be the score from that point on at the start of the power play when it was taken, and what does WASP predict would be the score at the end of the power play, and over the course, on average, do teams add to that or subtract to that? That's a measure of how much the batting power play has contributed, and it's about 4 runs. And that's an overstatement, because one of the things that teams started doing once the batting power play came in, and they were able to take it in the 40th over, now the 35th, was they started saying, the batting power play is where everything's going to happen. We better start playing more conservatively to save wickets. And so they actually pull back their scoring in advance. So the actual contribution to the batting power play is less than 4 runs. Now, the batting power play is a constraint that is imposed on bowling teams. And therefore, by definition, it should make things better for batting teams, because the bowling team can always put the field up if they want. The power play says they still can, but they can't put the field back. It tells them there are some things that you can't do anymore, but there's nothing that you are now allowed to do that you couldn't do before. And so it takes options away from fielding captains, and therefore it should, by definition, help the batting team. It doesn't seem to to any great extent. Why might that be? Well, one could be the sunk cost fallacy. And I think this has definitely got a part to play in it. So the sunk cost fallacy is you say, well, we've saved our wickets, we've spent 10 overs just nudging the ball around, hardly score any runs so that we're all ready for the power play. Now it comes, this is when we're going to finally do the scoring that we didn't do for the last 10 overs. And the first thing that happens is you take a big swipe and get bowled first ball. And then the replacement batsman comes and he says, well, this is the power play. We've been dicking around for all this time. This is the time we have to do it. Swing and a miss, he's gone. And you say, well, if we now just go back and start playing conservative, we're going to look like right fools. And so we're not going to let bygones be bygones. And we're just going to keep smashing the leather off the ball, and we're going to keep going out. If batting teams were to say, well, look, it's a risky game. Things happen. If things go well, we'll continue being aggressive, but if we lose a couple of wickets, we'll go back and say, oh, well, the power play didn't work out for us today. So possibly that's what's going on, that teams aren't doing that, and when things go bad, instead of just going a little bit bad, they go really, really bad. Another possibility, and this is the one I think is most likely, is that there's excess bowling side conservatism. That bowling teams are too quick to push the field back because the batsman scored a couple of 4s. And so couple of 4s, back goes the field, and the next thing you know, a team has access to 6 singles and over with no risk whatsoever, instead of putting pressure. Bowling teams don't recognise the value of taking wickets enough. They're also too conservative. And what the power play did was force them to do what they should have been doing all along, but were too silly to have worked it out. And therefore, it hasn't improved things because it has helped stop bowling teams being so silly. Okay, here's another puzzle. If your team had lost 9 wickets in an ODI, that means your worst batsman, your number 11, is at the crease. He's going to be partnered with the other batsman who hasn't yet gone out. That other batsman could be your number 10, your second worst batsman, or maybe it could be one of the guys who's in the team because he's a good batsman. Who would you rather have? Would you rather have your worst batsman partnered by your second worst or by one of your best? Now, it's obviously what you should want. You should want your better batsman. What does the data tell you you should want? You're going to do better with your number 10. Now, well, why would that be? Well, anybody who's ever watched a test innings where Chris Martin and Tim Southey were at the crease together will know exactly what's going on. Is that somebody who fancies himself as a batsman partnered with somebody who he expects to go out any ball is going to say, you know, come with man, it's up to me to bring this ship home because I can't rely on this clown at the other end. And they go off and take way too much risk. Have a look at Chris Martin's record in test matches for not outs. He's the worst batsman by far in the world, and he hardly ever goes out. Why? Because the guy at the other end is not giving him a chance to go out because he's just going ridiculously crazy trying to do it beforehand. If you've got your number 10 at the crease, he says, well, you're hopeless, but I'm not that much better. Let's just muck it through and see what we can do. And so this is a case where almost certainly what's going on is that good batsmen fancy themselves too much, or at least they they regard the number 11 as being too poor. What's going on with all of this? Well, we could simply assert that cricketers are stupid. And, as a sports fan, as I've said before, I have to confess that my children learnt their best swearing from watching me watching rugby. But remember the second lesson of economics. I said I'd come back to it. Economies don't make decisions, people do. Or teams don't make decisions. Teams are trying to win games, but teams don't make decisions. Teams are a collection of people, and collections don't do anything. Individuals make choices. They may make choices based on the social context in which they're in, but they're still individual choices. Maybe players are not being suboptimal or irrational. Maybe players are optimizing on some other objective. Now, I said before, we never in economics assume that people are rational. But we're also very loath to explain anything away by irrationality. We're not saying it's not possible, but when behavior occurs that seems a little bit silly, our first instinct is to say, well, first of all, let's try and see, might there be some objective which is not what mine would be that explains why they're choosing to do what they're doing? And I've just got a sense, based on what I have seen of the economics in sport and the statistics in sport literature, is that I've seen studies of tennis and golf and American football and others, and what you tend to find is that people looking at data can find all kinds of bad decision making when they're analysing team sports. And it's usually insufficient risk taking. Excessive conservatism seems to be a characteristic of the suboptimality that people find when they look at team sports. But when you look at individual sports, and the one I know best on this is work that a visitor to our department had done on tennis, on first serve and second serve. And this is when this first hit me. He was telling me about his work, and then it was very similar to how we were doing our work on cricket. And he said he's looking at the optimality of tennis players on, do they take off the aggression sufficiently when on the second serve compared to the first? And I said, I know what you're going to say. They're not aggressive enough. Everything in the literature on economics of sport, players aren't risk-taking enough. He says wrong. The top players get it absolutely right. And I've seen some other stuff on golf. The top players get it right. Tennis players and golf players paid a lot of money. So are American football players. And so are American football coaches. And they get it wrong. So are cricket players. They get it wrong. So what might be going on? Well, our answer is that you are not necessarily trying to maximize your team's chance of winning. As a coach, you're not necessarily trying to maximize your team's probability of winning. You've also got one eye on the fact that if you're a player, you want to be selected for the next game. If you're a coach, you want your contract renewed. And the fact that you know best what's the right decision to make because you know as a player your own abilities. And as a coach, you know the structure of the team. But the person who makes the decision on whether you're going to continue to be selected doesn't know as much as you do. That's why you're in that position. And that's a well-standard notion in economics, that managers should be trying to maximize the value of their company for the shareholders, but they don't want to be sacked, and frequently they take a very risk-averse strategy. There used to be a saying that just seems so ridiculously quaint today: nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. You buy a new computer that's not the mainstream and it turns out to be a disaster, your head's going to be on the chopping block. But if you buy IBM, nobody's ever going to say, well, that was a bad managerial decision, even if it doesn't look as good. The same sort of thing could be subconsciously going on in the heads of players. Now, to give you an example, John Bracewell, when we first started doing this work, John Bracewell was the coach, and he told us a story of one player, who I won't name, who, in the Black Caps, he said, your job is to come in, up the order, and play aggressively. I don't care if you go out. Your job is to take risks. That's what I want. We've got other players behind you who can shut up shop if you go out. Your job to do that. And he did, and it didn't come off. And Braceball says, he said to the player, that's fine, keep doing it. But that player got pilloried in the media. And even though he was doing what his coach asked him to do, he changed his strategy because of all the bad press. And so that gets me to what, last bit, we have a role. If we want our team to do well, we can play a role by understanding better the trade-offs. And so I've got a plea for all of you here. If you're a cricket fan, next time you hear some idiot in the commentary box saying, the biggest sin you can commit in one-day cricket is to not bat out your overs, make an irate call to talk back on Radio Sport, please. And tell them, why is it the biggest sin to not use one of your two scarce resources? But nobody ever says the biggest sin in one-day cricket is to finish your innings and still have 3 batsmen in the pavilion who haven't had a chance to come out and swing the bat. Okay? 2 scarce resources. Why should it be the case that you always want one of them down faster than the other? Next time you hear a commentator criticising a player for taking a risky shot and getting caught. And this one occurred to me, I don't know if you remember, one of the one-day games between West Indies and New Zealand late last year. We were batting, Kane Williamson was batting and batting well, but Nareen was tying us up in knots. And the commentators kept saying, just wait, just wait, just wait, the lousy bowler was coming. And the West Indies very cleverly kept him back, and the asking rate went up and up and up and up. And finally, Nareen sent down an absolute dog of a ball. It was awful. And Williamson, quite reasonably, pulled it, dispatched it really, really hard. Unfortunately, Chris Gale took an absolutely brilliant diving catch, end of his fingernails. Nobody else could have taken it, and Williamson was out. Any other fielder, that was 4 runs. The commentators went apoplectic about the irresponsibility of Williamson. My question is, if Gale had been 2 millimetres short and that ball had gone to the boundary, would they have been criticising him for taking an unnecessary risk and scoring a 4? If you hear commentators criticising batsmen when they go out for risky shots, have they equally criticised batsmen not going out and getting runs? Because if not, they are part of the problem in forcing batsmen to feel like they need to be too conservative and coaches need to be too conservative. And then my final plea, if when you call Radio Sport it's Brendan Telfer's show, please tell them that you're quoting a boffin sitting in front of a computer. Okay, thank you.